Welcome to the Good Old Football Podcast. I'm Matt Edwards. Today is March 2nd, 2021. It occurred to me last night, 1 year ago right now. I was at the Grand Canyon back home in New York City. They had just had their first COVID case. I remember it was a cab driver in Queens. A lot has changed. Joe Burrow wasn't a Bengal. The Browns hadn't won a playoff game in 25 years. Tom Brady was still a Patriot. The Texans were arguably the favorite to challenge the Chiefs for the AFC. Russell Wilson was not, out there leaking things about how much he hates Pete Carroll. Fans are still allowed at games. On March 4th, thank God the iPhone tags all these pictures. On March 4th, I went to a baseball game, a spring training game in Goodyear, Arizona, between the Reds and the Cubs. Little did we know that the world was going to fall apart in, just a couple weeks. But we seem to be going in the right direction at this point. My guest this week, who I really teased out there last week, could not make it. He's just busy right now, so whatever. And I'm not going to tell you who it is either. I know that you want to know, but I'm not going to. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. I should, right? It'd be the nice thing to do. Let's start with this. I think the J.J. Watt saga lasted the perfect amount of time. It was getting out of control on Monday when people were starting to look at his Peloton profile. Peloton, whatever it is, the bike that is right now sitting literally 2 feet away from me. The missus has one, but whatever it is, people were looking up his profile and, just determining things based on that. And then that's kind of when you start to realize just how bored the country has become over the last year. Every J.J. Watt tweet or breadcrumb inspires 1,000 memes. Who has time to do all those? Don't you guys, have real friends anymore? Shouldn't you call your grandma? And then on Monday, that's when it happens. He actually signs. And again, I can't believe people bid on the Peloton thing. People genuinely thought that J.J. Watt would put 3 NFL cities in his bio. It was Green Bay, Buffalo, Cleveland, by the way. And in front of those, he put Super Bowl 56. J.J. Watt, and I've said this 1,000 times, he loves attention, but he's not stupid. He's not going to, dangle that out there when there's probably 10 teams. I think it ended up being 8 or 9 that were going after him. So he signs with the Cardinals, which is underwhelming. I thought. I get it. I was just in Arizona this time last year. It's a beautiful place. It is great climate, sunny all the time, best golf courses in the world. I don't know. I think he golfs. I think I've seen some pictures of him online in a triple XL golf polo. By the way, again, bear with me. My teeth are messed up right now. Not speaking as fluidly as I typically would, or at least I like to hope that I would. But J.J. Watt going to Arizona, those 3 cities listed on the Peloton profile were what we view him as, right? Green Bay, Buffalo, Cleveland, blue-collar, hardworking, cold-weather environments. That's kind of what we wanted. He's sold us for years, for a decade now, on being Mr. Hard Hat, bring your lunch pail to work, and then he goes to Arizona, where all the tech billionaires have a house. I wanted to see him eating meatloaf, not sushi. I want blue collar from him, not golf resort. I just kind of underwhelming. And it's a team that's not even a favorite to make the playoffs. I looked up, and I'm not blaming him. Do whatever you want. And I'll talk about that later with these quarterbacks demanding trades. It's your life. Do what you want with it. I don't care what anyone else says. I always hate when other people try to tell other people what to do. If you want to lay on your couch, George Carlin used to have a great line. Show me a MF laying on his couch all day, touching his, and I'll show you a who's not causing any problems, right? Do what you want. Don't cause. George Carlin, not good old football cast friendly, but one of my favorite people of all time, and in my opinion, the greatest comedian of all time. However, that's kind of my thing too. Do what you want. As long as it doesn't hurt anyone else, who cares? Not causing any problems. So, do what you want, J.J. Watt, but he goes to a team that's not even a favorite to make the playoffs, right? The Cardinals have the longest odds of anyone in the NFC West to win the division. I think the Rams are now favored, and then the 49ers and Seahawks are closely behind them. But again, do what you want. It was just underwhelming. That's the thing. We hyped it up, It was going to be a homecoming in Green Bay. He was going to be Buffalo was going to land a big Buffalo or Cleveland was going to land a big name free agent, we all thought. Something that for most of this century is not something we ever even think possible. But it didn't happen. Goes to Arizona, where a lot of guys, as has been pointed out, Emmitt Smith, Edgerrin James, Kurt Warner, a lot of guys like to end the career there. Great place. Was just there. Love it. Marvin Lewis is there now. I don't think he wants to leave. I was looking at those divisional odds and some fun things popping up on the NFL futures. For one, and I mentioned at the top of the show, the Texans this time last year were kind of seen as the team who could challenge the Chiefs in the AFC. Remember, the NFL handpicked the Texans to open the season last year in Kansas City, thinking that was a premier matchup. Texans now have, I believe, the second worst or the second best odds to land the number one pick next year. That's what people think of them at this point, or what Vegas thinks of them at this point. And what was pointed out to me, the Jaguars have better odds than the Texans to win the NFC South. Not by much, but still. Remember, the Texans 14 months ago, 24-point lead in the playoffs against Patrick Mahomes. Life comes at you quick. The other thing, as far as divisional winners go, the Bengals have the longest odds of anyone at 2,500. I guess not of anyone. They're tied with the Detroit Lions at plus 2,500. Bad time to be a jungle cat in the league. Of course, for both teams, the odds being so long, in part due to their divisions, are very good. Obviously, Green Bay. Chicago, by the way, and I'll talk about Chicago more later, I think. I don't know. 8-8 2 years in a row, 11-5 the year before that. They're a quarterback away. If they don't throw everything, I'd give up my next 9 first-round picks for Russell Wilson if I'm them. They've been a quarterback away for 3 years. When Mitch Trubisky was there, the year he played well, 11-5. To go 8-8 in back-to-back years when you don't have a quarterback is pretty amazing. But yeah, both those divisions, the NFC South or the NFC North and the AFC North, pretty loaded. Tough times for the Lions and Bengals. And then I kind of stopped looking at it because I realized only junkies are looking at NFL divisional odds on March 1st. Speaking of those quarterbacks potentially on the move, I guess I'll finally talk about Deshaun Watson because I do kind of feel like it's going to happen at this point. Like he's telling people, I'm not playing for you again. And it's kind of, I guess the Texans, I'm sure, would accept him back. But it's pretty clear at this point, he's not bluffing. And if he is bluffing, he is great at bluffing. He has to approve a trade. Remember that, just like Russell Wilson does. There are 2 places I'd really like. I guess I don't care where he goes. Stay out of, prefer he goes in the NFC. I'd love him in San Francisco, just because in the other team, both these teams are going to mention great brands, I feel like. Great, the NFL is better when these teams are better. San Francisco won. Arguably the best offensive coach in the league in Kyle Shanahan. We've seen what he's done with Jimmy Garoppolo, who is good, not great. And it's a stable franchise. It's made 2 Super Bowls with quarterbacks not as good as him in the last 10 years? Last 9 years? Elite market, as some people like to say. I don't think markets matter as much as they did 20 years ago because everyone's got the internet, so you don't need to live in a top 6 city in the country to get big deals. I think we see this a lot now. I mean, Cam Newton playing in Carolina was in yogurt commercials. I mean, there's a lot of guys. I mean, Joe Burrow was a superstar playing in Cincinnati. Baker Mayfield's got 1,000 commercials playing in Cleveland. So you don't need that as much anymore because everyone can see these guys, as to where 20 years ago, if you were in New York, then 9 million people are going to see you in the newspaper the next day. If you're in Cincinnati, not as many millions, maybe tens of thousands, 20s, hundreds of thousands. But that doesn't matter as much now, but still a little bit, I think it does. Miami is the other place I'd like to see him go. And the more I think about it, Miami is the most logical spot, and they can give the Texans a lot in return, including Tua Tagovailoa, who was arguably, the number 1 pick last year. If Joe Burrow doesn't go crazy in the regular season last year, Tua's the number 1 pick. Obviously he did, but still, that's a kind of a pretty, you don't want to get rid of Deshaun Watson, but still, Tua and a couple of first-round picks, which, by the way, I think Miami has 2 this year, including the number 3 overall pick. And remember, the big thing here, Miami is a place that Deshaun likely would approve. Deshaun has to approve that trade, so he's probably going to do it. I mean, Miami looking hot, great market. If you're a 20-something-year-old multimillionaire, not a bad place to go. And they're another team that I just think the league's better. I mean, him and Josh Allen duking it out for 10 years would be a lot of fun. And let me say this on Deshaun Watson, and then I'll move on. I do think he's a little overrated. I think he's very good. I think he's a top. I didn't sit down and break it down. Maybe I will next week. I think he's a top 7 or 8 quarterback. I don't think he's a top 3 or 4 guy. You couldn't beat the Bengals at home in December with Brandon Allen starting at quarterback. I mean, I'm just a big believer. I mean, you look at the elite quarterbacks over time, they have made it work with some very bad cast members around them. Deshaun Watson did not do that this year. And I don't care who's on your team. If you can't beat Brandon Allen at home in December, you got issues. And I like Brandon Allen too, by the way. Good backup. But elite quarterbacks don't lose to teams like the Bengals at home. At least not when you're kind of down like they were. Right? Teams like the Bengals last year might catch someone off guard, when they're overlooking them and have a big game the next week. The Texans were playing at home with really nothing to play for. Elite guys don't. And again, I'm just saying, top 3 quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes doesn't lose that game. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning doesn't lose that game. Deshaun Watson's great, but to me, he's not in that class. I hope he gets there because I like him. He's a lot of fun, and maybe I'll be proven wrong on that. We will see. Let's turn our attention to another quarterback who apparently is not having a good time. One Russell Wilson, born in Cincinnati, by the way, apparently does not like Peter Carroll anymore. What's driving me crazy about this story, why don't the Seahawks just get rid of Pete Carroll? He's 70 years old, probably, got to be close to getting done. He'll be 70 this year, I should say. Russell Wilson has 8 good years left. Minimum. Right? And maybe 6 minimum. Probably 8, though. A franchise quarterback, a lot more difficult to find than a head coach. It's not a coincidence that all the great head coaches, go back and look, all of them have Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Bill Walsh, great. Invented the West Coast offense. Having Joe Montana helped with that. Don Shula, excellent. You could argue he's the greatest of all time. Doesn't hurt to have Bob Greasy and Dan Marino. Marv Levy, as great as he was in Buffalo, 4 straight Super Bowls. Jim Kelly helps a little bit. And look at Belichick without Brady. Losing record in Cleveland, losing record in campaign 1 without Tom. And Belichick, great. Undisputed top 5 head coach of all time, according to anyone. According to most people, probably the greatest of all time. But a losing record without the GOAT quarterback. Why the Seahawks aren't saying, all right, if we've got to make a decision, it should take no time to think about it. Russell Wilson's the guy. Tell Pete Carroll, thanks for the memories. Put him on a private jet down to a Margaritaville resort in Hollywood, Florida, and keep the franchise quarterback you got. That, by the way, you're lucky 31 other teams had to pass on twice so he could fall into your lap. That said, I do hope Russell Wilson gets traded. It would just be fun. I'd love to see him. I mentioned Chicago earlier, and the reason I'd love to see him go there, I think that place is a quarterback graveyard and will never have a good quarterback. I don't know what it is. I think people forget how good Jay Cutler was looking in Denver before he went to Chicago. And he wasn't terrible in Chicago, but he certainly didn't live up to expectations. That franchise is just baffling to me. The Bears, monsters on defense, great running backs. I mean, arguably you could argue that Walter Payton and Gale Sayers are the 2 best running backs of all time. They're both certainly 2 of the top 10, probably 2 of the top 5. You can put them however you want, but they're undoubtedly in that conversation. Historically, great linebackers, great running backs, just can't get the quarterback position right since what? Like Sid Luckman, who I think played before the NFL was a thing, played in like the 40s. Jim McMahon wasn't bad in the 80s, but he's not in Canton. Just for a franchise with so much history and really a lot of success. They've only got the 1 Super Bowl title, but they've been one of the more successful teams. You just can't get it right at that position. Could Russell Wilson be that savior? I sure hope we get to find out. That would be a lot of fun. I don't know what kind of capital they have to move over to Seattle, and I don't know Seattle. It could. And again, I mentioned Deshaun Watson, really playing his bluff, or if he is bluffing, it's one hell of a bluff. Russell Wilson could still be bluffing. Russell Wilson could get a couple offensive linemen, and winning solves a lot of problems. I don't think Russell's nearly as mad as Deshaun Watson is in Houston. So we'll keep an eye on all those things. I really do like it's kind of like what LeBron did in the NBA, which at first I didn't like. I think most people did not like kind of and look, I was a young stupid. When LeBron left, I wasn't even 21, I don't think. But again, like I said at the top of the show, these dudes have worked their whole lives to be great at this one thing. And then to get stuck in a place, A, you don't like, and B, just why should you have to carry all the weight when you've got options, when you've earned that right to say, hey, I want out, and by the way, there's a market for me. You know, if Mitch Trubisky came out, and I don't want to rip on him, Mitch Trubisky, a lot of guys like him. If Andy Dalton a few years ago, who you guys know I love, so I'll throw him in the mix. If those guys would have came out and said, hey, I'm demanding a trade, then it's kind of like, yeah, you're not quite on that level to do that. You'll probably, maybe fetch a fourth rounder, or the team will just cut you if you're going to cause this big of a ruckus. But when you've earned the right, like Deshaun has, like Russell Wilson has, Russell Wilson brought a Super Bowl to Seattle and took them to 2. Those guys have earned the right. They put their time in to an extent. Deshaun, not as much time, but look, you can't, sign the guy to a big contract, then trade away his best receiver, and then fire his head coach, and then you bring in Jack Easterby, who I don't know much about, but when everyone kind of says you're terrible, you're probably terrible. I'll quote another comedian, Cat Williams. He always said, if for 20 years someone says you're smoking crack, you're probably smoking crack. If it happens for 3 months, maybe that wasn't the best example. I don't remember the bit. It's been 1,000 years since I watched that. But that's the thing. If there's one little tweet out there from someone with a blog in Memphis, it's not going to pick up steam. But when Adam Schefter, a few months ago, when the Texans fire their PR person, goes after you, and Chris Mortensen, and just repeatedly everyone says, yeah, the Texans are a mess. Jack Easterby, by the way, who's trying to do stand-up at these church services. I don't know if you've seen those videos, but he gets up there on stage, probably at Joel Osteen's place, I don't know, and is trying to literally tell jokes, just doing California stereotypes, saying, hey, man, just from that alone, he could be an excellent guy outside of that, and that would be enough reason for anyone not to like him. But Deshaun Watson, just like an investor on Wall Street, if you see the stocks going down, get out early. And that's what he's trying to do, and good for him. All right, that's going to do it for today. I will be back next week. I'm hoping to have a guest next week. I'll do a better job of lining that up. It's more fun for me that way. And not that I'm not having fun today, but you get the point. It's the Good Old Football Podcast. Going to try to keep these rolling through the off season. If you like it, tell a friend. Just retweet it. Do something. Help out a little bit. All right, if you want to hang out on Twitter, I'm Matt Edwards. I tweet a lot less once football season's over, but what are you going to do about it? It's a Good Old Football Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again next week.